Hello everyone, so today I will be talking about the second way of drawing forms, which is using light. So like the way we see forms in real life, which is just the way light wraps around us and kind of like how it hits our eyes. So for the past week I've been talking about drawing through, but once you practice drawing through a while, you'll want to start lighting the objects. So I'm just going to draw a cube and a sphere, and I'm going to not draw through the cube, but draw through the sphere just for myself. So the first part of lighting is like where the light is coming from. So if it's the sun, it's usually coming from the top, or it kind of changes throughout the day, but it's usually bright enough that it kind of fills out, like keeps most things like pretty bright. So let's say the sun or the light on this one is coming towards it this way. So the light's going to be here and it's going to hit the top a little bit. And then for the sphere, I'm going to say it's kind of in the same angle. I mean, same direction, but different angle. So right around there is where the light will hit. So now, once you know where your light is coming from, you'll be able to tell like which sides of an object will have shadow and which sides will be light. So in the cube's case, we're going to focus on, so if this is the light side, I'm going to leave that white, and I'm going to shade these two sides first in one, like in one go. Let's say I'm trying to stay within the lines. In some parts I didn't draw lines enough, but I'll try my best to stay within them. So for this cube, I'm going to sharpen that edge a little, darken it a bit. And then the top, because I said it was coming from around here, I'm going to shade it a little bit, but not as dark as this one. Technically, you can do it as dark because the number of shades of gray you kind of need to represent something is, honestly, you could just use 2 shades and you'll be fine. You'll be able to light anything. So for this cube, let's say these are the exact same. And then if I add a third, it'll just add a little bit more depth. So I'm just going to add this one to say like there's no light hitting this at all. So I'm darkening it a bit more. Okay. So that's our cube. And I'm using only 3 values. So where the light is, which is our white, where the light kind of hits, but it's still in shadow, which is the top, and then the part that's in full shadow, which is this side of the cube. And then to add a cast shadow, I'm basically just going to go, if the light's coming from here, I'm going to point down. I'm just going to see what basically what blocks this side. So I know this is going to be like this with regards to like where the light is coming from. The shadow is always going away from the light, so it's kind of like the same arrow you make to tell yourself where the light is coming from is like you could go in that same direction for where the shadow is. And there's this whole other side that we're not seeing, so I'm going to draw through for this one just so I could get like a idea of where the edge is coming. And then I'll just boom. And then I'm going to follow that line that I made for that corner. And this is my shadow. So I'm going to make my shadow darker or as dark as this. So this would be called a cast shadow. Let's see. Because it's basically the shadow casted by the object that's being lit. Okay. So that's basically the cube. And then, so one thing you'll realize is that shadows or the light hits objects not in the same way, depending on the type of edge it has. So because this is a cube and all the edges are just straight, very sharp lines, like the turn from this plane to this plane is very sharp. So the sphere, it's different because it would be softer than this. So I wouldn't be drawing all these straight lines for the sphere. I'll try to sketch out my where my light is hitting, or like the point where my sphere turns from light to dark. I'm just going to kind of rough it in. Like I'm already starting to do it without like straight lines. I'm just doing it by kind of shading. So that's my edge. And then now I'm going to just darken it here a little. Now I'm just going to use that same, like the edge of my pencil to shade in the dark side of the ball. And I'm also going to sharpen out the edge on the ball on that side, just so you could tell that it's like objects. And then I'm gonna darken this center part, because when a form turns from light to shadow, usually it looks like that middle, like that transition area is a little darker. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'm gonna shade everything on the dark side again. And again, and that's, I'm basically using 2 values on this one, but I'm gonna use a third one just to kind of indicate the darkest part of the, like the part where light doesn't touch the ball at all. That's usually what lines are in the real world. So what you see as lines is usually just like either separation of objects, or it's what's like an area where light never touches. So because the light's coming this way, for the shadow, I'm going to go this way. A bit more like that. And I'm going to draw the widest part. I'm going to go straight back. From the widest part, I'm going straight in the direction of my shadow, kind of curving, and just going to meet up right there. I would say it's a bit lower. Let's see. Because there's no like, I don't have like a table for this ball. I'm kind of just doing guesswork for where the shadow is going to hit. So I feel like this is good. Not too long. And now I'm going to shade this dark to get that shadow shape. You could even blend this in, but I'm going to just darken it a bit more on the edge just to show the separation between the object and its shadow. There. So this would be a hard edge, and these are soft edges. Yeah. Now, when it comes to lighting, the most important part is values. So I'm just going to draw like a cube and separate it. So this is my white, and this is going to be black. So I'm going to shade it in as dark as possible. Let's get dark. All right. So if this is my darkest color that I'm going to use, this is my lightest, I'm just going to try practicing what's in between. Let's see here. I'm just doing it all the same. And this one I'm going to go a little lighter. There you go. And now here I'm going to darken it again by just going over a second time. And this one, same way, trying to get it to match that. A little bit darker just so. Yeah. So your values are the way you kind of tell people what's in light and what's in shadow. And when an object is turning, you use these middle ones. So the easiest way I've been able to light objects is by first drawing out my object using draw through or anything. So in this case, I'll draw a face, right? So quick face, sharp chin, I guess, ears, eyes. I actually draw out the eyelids and the eyelashes because I learned it from anime and it's actually really useful. I used to just kind of draw lines for the eyelashes, but there we go. Mouth. Oh, that's a bad mouth, but bottom lip, chin, neck. And hair, we're just gonna do some weird. I'm just doing random curves for the hair. Yeah. So this is my face. And first I'm going to shade it with just 2 values. So I'm just going to use my darkest color, which is this one, and white, which is basically I'm just not going to color in that, like shade in that area. And before I do that, I'm going to think of where my light is going to be coming from. So if I were to say, like, say the light is coming on this angle towards the face, right? First thing I'm going to do is think about where all my shadows are going to be. So because the light's coming on this side, I know that it's going to be darker on this side. The nose bends in, and we're going to see the bottom of the nose kind of hit, but from this point downward. I'm also thinking of what's casting what, right? So this nose is going to be casting a shadow on the face itself from where the light is hitting. That's one. And then this lip is going to have a little cast shadow. This whole part So this hair is going to cast a shadow right onto the face right here. I would say I could put a shape here for where the shadow is, here, and then the cheek, I'm going to draw out basically my shape of my cheek. So all these parts I would say are in shadow. Okay, so there, and then on this side, I would say there's a little bit of shadow here. And then because I put my light like right here, it's kind of a complicated lighting scenario. Because I put my light right there, this is going to be hit by light. This might not be hit by light because it might not be as dark, but it might be like a little bit of shadow because of just the eyebrow ridge. I'm just going to add a line there for the separation of the forehead and the side of the head. There. So from here, I'm not even going to like do multiple colors. I'm just going to do one color for that whole part. So that's where light's hitting. Put a shadow in here, shadow in here, and this whole side. And because the light's hitting that way, shadow here, shadow right there, shadow right there. Because the eyeball is a ball, so it bends in a little. I'm going to add a cast shadow here from the hair. I'm going to add that nose shadow that I talked about. There we go. I'm going to add sharper lines. Make this darker. Color in my eyelashes. I forgot to do that. But sharper line, sharper line. And then this whole part of the hair will be in shadow. So I'm just going to basically color all that in. Not worrying too much. I'm just trying to show that you can basically indicate what an object is just with two shades at the start, right? So now that this character is basically in shadow, I'm going to do the areas of the head where no light's going to reach, right? So this edge, the indication of where the hair is and the head touches, usually it's a little darker. And then the head is kind of going to be really dark around the face. The hair will kind of shade and get darker here. Just because the light's coming from here, it's hitting the head and there's not enough light to hit the hair. It's a pretty complicated topic when talking about shading, but this is kind of how I think when I do it. Because I have like this hair here, I'm going to kind of do this. I'm going to add my lines in. Here we go. Shade that down. So that's my second value I'm using, right? So first I had two values, and now I'm using a darker value just to indicate where light doesn't touch. So this close to the chin, usually, we could just darken that a lot more. And because this strand of hair is around here, I'm just kind of picking shapes. I'm trying to think about like the shapes I'm making and trying to make them look a little bit more appealing too while I'm doing this. But I'm trying to, using like where the light is going to be hitting, I'm trying to pick shapes that work. So I know this will be darker because this is like the area between the nose and the eyebrow. So that's going to be dark. I'm going to shade this in pretty dark. This I'm going to do a little bit lighter, not as dark. This, because it's coming away from the light, I'm going to go dark. And now I'm going to try to do a soft shadow because it's hair to just show, like kind of curve it towards the light. Here too, from here, I'm going to go a little darker, sharp. And then, but this one I'm going to be a little bit softer, right here. And then here. Oh, I messed up there because I already indicated that the light's coming from here, so there shouldn't be any too much shadow on that unless it's like a line for the hair, like a hair strand or a hair chunk itself. I like to think of hair as chunks instead of strands because that's kind of how hair grows, right? It's never, even though it grows in strands, they kind of clump up in specific areas. So, and based on your, like how you style your hair. But even if you leave it messy, it clumps up in specific areas. Okay, now I'm going to think of mine not as dark as these colors, but like what shadows can I add to this? And those are going to be based on like the forms. So like the way the skull kind of bends in and out, or a face bends in and out. So I'm going to put a little bit of shadow right under here, but it's really light. I'm not going any darker. I'm just trying to be as light as possible. This, the bend of the cheek to the chin. I'm going to darken this area a little just to show separation between the lips. Okay. I would say a little darker right here. Darken that just to frame the face a little. I'll put a little bit of shading right there. Because this is majority in shadow, I'm going to put that where the eye was, because I kind of messed up that eye. Then I'm just going to shade right here. This area is going to be a little bit in shade, but it's not going to be a lot, so I'm going to erase it a bit just to help myself out. I'm going to darken the area that should be darker, like eyebrows and eyelashes, which I should have done at the beginning, but I messed up, so whatever. As long as the idea of how I think when I shade comes through, that's kind of all that's important. Then we could even say, because the light is coming towards the face on this side, we could put the top of the head kind of in shadow, not as dark shadows, but as light. But I'm trying to kind of color it in a way where it looks like hair clumps are coming out in the middle or something, because that's kind of how I started off the drawing. So another thing that's important is always to like reference when you draw out things that you've never kind of seen before. I've seen hair, but I don't think I've ever tried drawing it in this kind of hairdo. So the way it comes out of the head is important, but I don't know how it comes out exactly. So I'm just doing guesswork. Now I'm darkening out my lines that I want, like, to indicate that it's the edge of one object and the other. Shading in the neck again. Adding volume here, just better design shape, I guess. There we go. Continuing to work on the shading of the hair. I want to try to indicate the curve between this plane, like so the side of the forehead and the front. So I'm just going to lightly shade in here, try as soft as possible. So that's like where the soft edges come in, where something turns but it doesn't like turn sharply. Like this nose, it's pretty sharp, so I could always just darken here. And I'm going to add my nostril a little. Other than that one eye getting messed up, I'm kind of happy with this drawing. So that's basically how I think about shading. So now let's start with like the time lapse. The first thing I drew was a mailbox. So I started off just trying to draw the shape of the mailbox first. Even though I was drawing through, I wasn't getting the shape. So I drew a cube first, because that is the basic shape of a mailbox. And then I drew like the arches inside it. Even though they're not perfect, it still kind of looks better than what I started with. Even for the arch of the open, like the door of the mailbox, I started off with a plane, like a square plane. And then I drew the arch within that too. So that's one thing I realized while drawing was, like, if you are having a hard time drawing something, it's always best to like draw a cube first in whatever perspective you need, and then draw the object inside that cube using like draw through and everything. And that will usually, you'll come out with a more structured and more like a better form of the object itself. So if you saw earlier, I drew in the items inside the mailbox by drawing through the mailbox too. And now onto like the main part, which is the shading. I'm starting off with my dark areas, adding a little bit of detail on the packages. And the light's coming from the top left. So I know that there's going to be like not too much light hitting the bottom of the mailbox or any planes at the bottom. So I'm just coloring all of that in. And then for the pole of the mailbox, I'm kind of planning out where the cast shadow is going to be of the mailbox on the wood like pole itself. So you can see there, I darkened like the parts where I know like the mailbox the mailbox is on the shadows hitting the poles. And then I added a few details just to indicate that it's wood, just in the light parts by kind of pulling it out of the shadows. And then because the mailbox is metal, I started off with the center part, which would be the terminator. But I have more of a drastic change between what's dark and what's light on the mailbox itself. Everything else is like more straightforward, just following where the light is coming from and drawing away from and shading away from the light basically. Next thing I drew was a pig, which was mainly made of spheres that I drew through and triangles for the ears. You can see I'm sketching a little bit more of the mailbox just to make it look more nicer. And I added some extra lines to make the pole look more like wood. If you saw on the pig, I'm adding a plane at the bottom just to have my perspective right. And now I'm just doing lighter, like the shadows that I'm seeing in the light. So they're just light, like strokes of the pencil just to indicate where the shadow is. And then I'm separating what is in the light and with what's dark, and shading in the darkest parts of the pig itself. And I'm getting the form. I'm making sure that I'm using soft edges on this one because it is a natural object and not like a man-made object. So I'm adding my darker darks on the pig, and like for parts that are dark, like the pig's hair, it's usually darker, so I darken that out. I'm darkening the backs of the legs, and I'm just like shading in and darkening the parts that lights aren't really going to hit, while adding a little bit of form and adding like lighter shades on the light side for the parts that the lights hit, but like because of the way the body kind of goes in and out, it'll have a little bit of shadow coming on those parts to show the form of the pig itself. For the grass, it's just like simple strands, very sketchy, just to make it look more like grass and less like a blank plane that's flat and clean. I forgot to add the lip on the mailbox, so I just added it there, but I couldn't light it correctly. The next object I drew was a boat. So I started off with a sphere to get the base of the boat. And if you can see, I'm drawing through and drawing like the extruding, like pulling out of the sphere to make like the front of the boat and the back. Because my reference, the boat was on a pile of like wooden planks and on a wedge, I drew those at the bottom. My hand is blocking it, but I'll remember to pay attention to my hand next time. So I'm drawing the inside of the boat, which is where the fisher or the boat driver would be, and adding the pole, adding the small details on the boat itself. Now that I got the big drawing out, I'm just adding my details by drawing the trim and things like that, making sure I have the thickness, which I missed on the mailbox. I'm making sure I have the thickness of the pieces of wood or whatever's on the boat itself. Here I'm darkening out all the important parts, all the things I need, and shading the inside of the boat, the top inside of the boat, knowing that the light won't really hit the top of the boat. Because this is simple, I'm not thinking about bounce light or anything like that. I'm just thinking where the light's coming from and what it's going to hit. And now I made darker inside the boat and adding those darker parts on the trim to show that there's no light coming like under the boat for that to be lit. And for the pole, because the pole is black, I kind of just darkened it a bit, but left some part to look like it's shining. So there's some white on the pole where the smoke comes from itself. Detailing the bottom and adding all my darker shadows to where the light's coming from at the bottom, or away from the light at the bottom. Then I drew my line for where the light is coming from and shaded everywhere that I know is going to be dark. And then darkening further the bottom of the ship just because I know that part is going to be darker than the top half of the shadow side of the ship. Doing the same for the planks. And once I got all that done, I tried to soften some parts because the boat's shape, the big shape, is a round object and less like angular. So the shadow, the main light hitting through, will have a little softness. I also realized I was smudging my paper, so I erased some parts. Next was a chicken, which is a very fluffy animal. So all the shadows had to be soft on this one. So I drew in my darkest parts first, like where maybe there's a wing on top and stuff like that. I started off with a sphere for the chicken and used tubes and cylinders. And now I'm doing the top of the chicken and the bottom and adding where my shadow is going to be. But I'm trying to be as soft as possible when I shade it in. Unlike like the boat or the mailbox, I'm trying to keep it as soft as possible. I also realize I have to draw on the right because I'm left-handed, so I don't smudge the page while I'm drawing. Continuing that, just making it darker, making the bottom part of the chicken darker, and while it goes up a little bit lighter and lighter, and using my finger to smudge anywhere that, like smudging up towards the light to make it look more rounder. If you see it on that wing, it really worked there. And the chicken was fairly straightforward, but this is a more complicated object, which is a fruit bowl. Where the light is coming from. I believe it came from the right on this one. So I drew out my fruit bowl using my basic shapes and drawing through. Drew out my fruits that are sitting inside the bowl and making sure everything looks like their volumes are correct and it looks like they're sitting on each other and none of it's like clipping through. And then I darkened the lines of the objects just to have more detail. And now you can see I'm kind of drawing my light versus dark and where the shapes of light are and where the dark is. I had to finish the chicken drawing, so I added some grass there. And then doing my darkest darks, like inside the bowl. And now I'm just shading in with like one flat value of the areas I know that are not being hit by light. And adding my shadow there. Yep, and just darkening it out and making sure everything is kind of clear at the same time, because I want to make sure, at least just from looking at it at a glance, it does look like what it's supposed to be. So here I'm just shading out the grapes and stuff. I also shaded the part of the light, an area in the light that's not as bright as like the highlights, right? So that I did that and then I darkened the Terminator part. If you look at the bowl, I darkened the middle part, the transition, and now I'm just detailing and shading out the fruits itself, making sure to leave some light in some areas just to indicate where the light is coming from. And the last thing I drew was a person. So I drew a plane of where they're going to be standing. I'm drawing the body using basic forms, mainly tubes and spheres, and like rectangles and stuff, and cubes. So there's the head, the arms. He's holding on to like a box and feeding birds. So the box is made of a cube, which you can see I drew through. And there's the hand coming out. And there's the shape of the bird, which I also drew through using basic forms like the sphere. The wings, I kind of just drew a shape. Now I'm just adding my detailed lines for like the ears, the eyes, the clothing. In this case, I've never focused on clothing before, but I drew like the clothing that the character is going to be wearing, like on top of the body itself. Like you still see my drawing of where I left the body. And now I'm just shading out, I believe I'm just detailing the hand. Yeah, I'm detailing the hand, adding a few more elements of the birds on the ground and stuff like that. Now I'm shading out my dark areas, like places where I noticed there's a darker shadow than the rest. And now I'm adding the main shadow, so to indicate where the light is coming from. If you can see there. And just from that, you should be able to tell what the character is doing, or what the character, at least where the light is coming from, and what the object I'm drawing is. And now I'm adding my lighter shadows and like putting shadows on the box, under the arms, where the chest and the arm contact each other, causing folds. On the legs, the rounded parts of the legs, just to indicate that they're rounding. And I sketched out my shadow there in the back on the wall. And then I added my darker darks and just sketching out the shadow fully. even though the shadow doesn't make sense, I just kind of did it just for practice, at least knowing where the direction of the shadow is going. And now I'm shading the birds a bit where the light hits and where the darks are, you can see. And the bottom bird too, adding a shadow for that. And that's it, basically. Like, subscribe, comment if you have any questions. Thanks.